our children and youth, as well as the biological families. So learning and talking about setting those boundaries early on in the process so everybody knows what they are is really important. Obviously, clear communication from the onset, and the clear communication moving forward. That's also part of boundary setting, what you're able to do and not able to do, what you're willing to do, and also what you're not willing to do. So we have to look at the different parenting values that might be involved, that kind of thing, when we're thinking about setting up an openness agreement or an order. One of the hardest things for me, and I think for a lot of other adoptive families, is trying not to feel threatened by the biological mother or biological father. I think it's a base fear. If we let them continue to see their biological children, will those children love us? Will they be torn? Will they reject me as a mother or as a father? You know, what will happen? Those are fear-based feelings, and we got to resolve those and look at them and be honest about them. And then logistics of the visit, how is that going to happen? In one of my children's lives, he had 10 siblings. They were all placed in different homes. Logistically, trying to do ongoing visits, it was unbelievably challenging. So you have to look at really what is realistic in terms of making visits or connections happen. Very basic in terms of the challenge of not hiding the family of origin, because it's part of who your child or youth is. So, you know, to me, when I thought about this topic, those were some of the basic challenges that I remember going through, in fact, probably with all 5 of the adoptions. The benefits, which is what I think are, you know, is so important, is the fact that we know studies, research show the more open the adoption, there is a bigger decrease in chances of a birth parent changing his or her mind. The more they know about you, the safer they feel about you, the more comfortable they are, they would more likely go through with an adoption. I should have put this one right at the top of the slide. An overarching vital thing is that children grow up knowing who they are and where they come from. So their identity in who they are as people is much more grounded and solid. And that's what we want for them. We want our kids and our youth to grow up to be confident and comfortable in their own skin. They grow up knowing that they're loved by both sets of parents. They grow up knowing that they are worthy and important, and you can't give a better base for self-esteem than that. The other thing is often our children and youth do fantasize about the birth family when they don't know. Children and youth, and even us grown-ups, have amazing imaginations. And so sometimes the picture they paint is either on the extreme of being the perfect mother and fathers out there, not where they're living, or the opposite, that their parents must have been awful, terrible, scary people. And either end is not the truth, right? There's a story. So if we know a lot about their family and they're able to connect, they don't have to fantasize. They don't have to pretend. They know about their family, and they also have that process of getting to know their birth family over time. So it reduces unrealistic fantasizing on that level. So by accepting without judgment the family of origin, children really know that you accept and love all of who they are. And again, that's the base of creating a healthy, contributing, happy person who's going to, you know, be okay. And that's the goal that we all have as parents. Bless you, Shannon. You can go to the next slide. I think.
So we're just going to switch gears a little bit. Thanks, Joyce.
You're welcome.
I think I agree. I think one of the things you ended with is that we all have the same goal, and that's for permanency and to grow up healthy, happy, capable kids with resources to manage hard times in life, because One of the things that I think can happen for anyone in a parenting role is they can think they want their children to be happy. And what I talk about with families a lot is, as we're raising children, we want them to know what happy is and have experiences that bring them joy. But we also want them to have the tools for life when it's hard and when it's challenging. And we want to grow up whole, resourced people. So as I was thinking, when I got involved in adoption, I was really looking at how there is so much grief in adoption, because people come to this process often because they have experienced some kind of loss. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what grief is. And grief is the experience of any loss. And it's continuous and it's ever changing, and it can arrive without warning. It is not something that we can ask children to get over, nor can we ask caregivers to get over it. We want to build tools and resources for grief, and we want to create space for it. When it comes to children experiencing grief, one of the really important things that they need is helpful adults who provide empathy and a listening ear, meaning that they allow kids to experience their grief in a genuine way and support them through it. Caregivers who can support the development of healthy expressions of complex feelings and offer them healthy strategies. So again, we go back to, we can't have this fantasy that we are going to have always happy kids. We want kids to learn all the emotional language and all the experiences that they're having. And when they can understand what's happening for them, then we help them develop healthy tools for all of their feelings. And I think when we're talking about grief, grief is about difficult conversations about loss. They are challenging conversations because they bring up so many emotions. But as we can become more comfortable in the discomfort of having these hard conversations, what we'll find is that kids can experience things in a genuine way, and that they can grow up and understand all the parts of them, which creates a healthy self-esteem, a healthy identity. And when I think about having conversations about adoption and openness and relationships and loss, we allow kids to not sit and grieve alone, and we allow them to avoid any further grief and loss. So here we are at a triangle. So when we're looking at the adoption triad, we're really looking at the child, the biological family, and the adoptive family. And I think why I look at grief as a starting place is because a lot of the children who are coming to adoption are coming with histories. A lot of them have had the loss of their biological family. They may have gone into different foster homes or with different caregivers. And so they've lost significant relationships in order to get to the point of adoption. The other thing in terms of grief and loss is not only have they potentially lost significant relationships, they've lost significant schools maybe, or even houses, or pets, or other foster siblings, or other relatives. And then I think even at a different level, they've lost toys like their bike, or things they've had to leave behind. And so they carry this backpack of grief that is legit and relevant to be talking about and to acknowledge. Biological families at the point of adoption have likely gone through different traumas or different experiences of grief and loss, and they've now lost the title of being caregiver to their young person. And so to acknowledge that they have been through many places and many situations where they have had to grieve, and to have empathy and compassion and actually talk about that, then we can begin to explore some of the things that might be getting in the way and some of the resources that are needed to support biological families in their grief. And on the third point, adoptive parents, and this is not true for all adoptive parents, but many have come through their own grief and loss stories, sometimes fertility, grief and loss. But we need to acknowledge how people come to the adoptive process and some of the things that adoptive parents are carrying in their grief story and how they can come to the table to support grief in a holistic way. The other thing I want to say about grief, there's a misconception that if we talk openly about grief or we talk about loss, that it will actually be upsetting to kids. And the truth of the matter is, it may be upsetting, but we're also letting kids know that there is space to have these hard conversations and that you will be there for them. Just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean kids aren't experiencing it and thinking about it. And it's interesting because I also do grief work with kids, and sometimes there are triggers for people that we don't even know. And I think about, you know, has anybody ever walked through the bay and smelt a scent, and you know what that brings up for you? Or when I think about a child in terms of this, sitting in a classroom, and how many times the words mom and dad are used, or there are just many things that will bring up grief. And if kids have a space to bring it, again, we're going to grow those strategies in open communication. So things to consider. Children often stay connected to their roots after death. When I first started doing grief work in the death and dying world, there is a grief theory called continuing bonds. And what that means is after the death of a person, we encourage kids to continue to have connection to that person because they are special, they are a part of them, all their goodness and their flaws. And what struck me was, if we are in this world where we're encouraging continuing bonds with people who have died, how are we asking kids to sever those bonds when those bonds are still tangible? And so it's really about encouraging healthy connections to roots and healthy connections to the people in their world. How can we avoid further loss for children through openness? Again, when I love, Joyce, that you also talked about foster parents. When kids don't have to say goodbye and a final goodbye to so many things, then we're avoiding more and more loss, grief and loss. So where we can keep them connected and some sense of belonging to a village, they don't have to keep experiencing loss after loss after loss. So again, I think about openness as this idea of creating a village. And that kind of goes down to this point of us and them. If children don't, like Joyce was saying, if children don't have to decide, or if there's no competing needs between the adoptive family and a biological family, there's just a village who can love a child. And children have all the space in their hearts to love as many people who will love them. So then I think about how can we support biological families and adoptive families? We can avoid secrecy and we can bring hard things out into the open and really acknowledge what each kind of point on the triad is bringing to this process, and have empathy and compassion and understanding so that we can problem solve around all the different things that are happening for people. It's within this understanding of people's grief and loss and worries and ideas and fears that we can begin to manage expectations, explore some of the worries that are easily problem solved, or some of the worries that can be buffered. And we can begin to address some of the misconceptions. And like Joyce was saying, that sometimes in some of the families I've worked with, they've had a lot of fear about openness because there was a whole lot of trauma and neglect that happened to bring a child to the adoption. So are those good people? And so just demystifying that people have their own struggles and people have had their own grief and loss, and there are people who can have many, many challenges and still have the capacity to love a child, even if they cannot be the person that raises them. So again, I think about how a caregiver's coping can contribute to the positive or negative outcomes for children. And this really stems from the concept of attachment. And what are we bringing as caregivers to this adoption triad? Where are our own insecurities, our own fears that get in the way of us being able to really acknowledge what a child may need and what a child needs us to be to create secure attachments? And secure attachments can come, as I've said, even if there's a village of people. So when I'm moving along this, I think about how each part of the triangle needs resources from the very beginning, spaces to talk about what's actually happening for them, their fears, their misconceptions, their expectations. And if we were to do that openly and honestly at the forefront, we could look at what each point of the dyad needs in order to move forward in a healthy way so that children don't have to experience more losses. So let's consider, how do we create an accurate life story over time? Joyce has already talked about this. If we have open and honest communication with children about where they come from and who they can be and who they are, we can do that in age-appropriate ways, starting from a really young age. Kids will begin to hear that you're creating a safe space to talk about anything. And so if they know throughout their life story, they don't have to go searching for it. They don't have to have the fantasies that Joyce was talking about. They don't have to create the unknown because they actually have a true story. That's how we prevent kids from developing the fantasies. And again, as Joyce was talking about this concept of, us and them, I think about it from a kid's perspective. If the roots that I come from are somehow not good, then what does that do for my self-esteem? But if I have an accurate story that I was loved and, even that they wanted me but couldn't care for me, that means I am worthy as a child, not that I was rejected or given up or not loved. And so if we can include this village concept, then the child's ability to build a healthy self-esteem is so much more available to them. The other consideration, and I know this came up in one of the questions, is simply the power of social media. We are going to have a heck of a time keeping anything a secret these days. And so when I think about social media and how young kids are accessing this, I think about that accurate life story. And if we've created the space for open conversations and for kids to come to us as the adoptive parents and talk about where they're at, then they don't have to go underground to find their roots. They're going to ask you to support them to find those roots or to be a part of those roots. And there will be no need for them trying to navigate this on their own. So again, what I'm really talking about is looking at the triad and really understanding what each part of the triad needs. So at the beginning of an adoption process, we can manage some of the things that would help for openness. And we can begin to put in the supports needed so that children don't have to lose anymore. So again, I have this circle, and I think when we start off in the process, there can be so many misunderstandings, mistrust. I know adoptive families have told me over and over again that they just have small snippets of information about biological families and what really has happened for their child. And again, if we can build communication, build transparency, exchange accurate information, and begin to have respectful negotiations between adoptive families and biological families, the children don't ever have to feel like they're choosing. They don't have to experience the loss. And again, this benefit of the village, that children get to have everybody in their life in a way that is meaningful. So the child maintains connections to their roots. And in doing so, they will have things like a connection to cultural identity, a connection to their medical history, a connection to genetic histories. And all of those things are a part of our identity. And again, helpful to adoptive parents to know as their child is developing and growing. In having open and honest communication, again, kids will have a clear understanding of what adoption is, why adoption came into their life, and that they are loved. So if we can understand this idea of grief, attachment ruptures, and trauma that different parts of the triad are experiencing, then again, we can have empathy and we can begin to talk about things and not push things underground for people to feel like they have to deal with on their own. We can identify biases and fears and power dynamics, and we can create space for everybody to have their own grief experience. They can talk about their worries openly without judgment. I know adoptive families have said to me, if I actually talk about worry, or I talk about my grief, or I talk about my fears in parenting, maybe I don't get to be the parent. And I think to myself, again, let's not push people's fears and concerns underground. Let's bring them to the surface and make sure that each person feels as resourced as possible. And that I'm just going to skip to. When we're looking at openness, it's different than access. And Martha's going to talk about this. But we can't expect biological families and adoptive families to just understand openness and understand what the options are. Again, we as professionals can be talking about what I like to call the menus of openness, because there are so many options and there's a scale and a continuum of what to consider. And where you go with that is really based on all of the understanding of where everybody in the triad is at. And to think about how it can evolve over time, it may need to change over time, and relationships and openness may need to have some flexibility to it. And with that, I will pass it to Martha.
There, and I've unmuted myself. I am going to try to, we want to leave enough time for everyone to have questions at the end of the webinar. So I am going to go through this pretty quickly. And hopefully people will have time to ask for questions. And I'd actually prefer to answer questions than just, speak just off the, I'd like to speak specifically to what people are wanting to know about. So I'm just going to go quickly. In terms of the process, there are openness agreements and openness orders allowed for in the legislation. Openness agreements have been what have happened since the dawn of adoption. Really, openness agreements are anytime a biological family member and an adoptive family member have an arrangement between themselves about contact with the child post-adoption. And there's nothing that precludes any parent from negotiating an openness agreement with a biological parent. The legislation, what I'm about to talk about really is more openness orders. There is a much more of a process in place for them. But in terms of openness agreements, what you just need to know is that if you don't have an openness order in your case, or there's no access that's been existing in your child's life before adoption placement, nothing precludes you from yourself working out an openness agreement with the biological family. Openness orders are orders that there's a process for them that I'm going to talk about. These are filed with the court, or they're orders of the court, and they are enforceable and they do need to be followed. So, there's a process, as I say, which I'm going to talk about. Only children who are in extended care of the society and have an order for access in place can have a formalized openness order. There's some exceptions to that. One is that FNIM children can have an openness order in place where there was no access ordered, and that is because they can also have access to their band in addition, as well as to family members. And the other exception would be in the rare case where the Children's Aid Society agrees to or decides to bring an openness application for a child where they feel it would be in the best interest of the child to have access to a biological parent. That's pretty rare. Usually these orders are being, or these applications are being brought by access holders to the children or the children themselves. So we could look at the next slide. Yeah, so openness applications, as I say, are either brought by any person who has been granted the right of an access order. And as I say, that can be the adult who has access to the child or the child themselves. Next slide. So the process for an openness order, first of all, I would just point out that all of the different Children's Aid Societies function slightly differently, and all of the agencies are learning at different speeds the best ways to manage openness and the process to manage openness. Hopefully most of them, and I think most of them, are aware that they need to start talking about openness as soon as they start looking for adoption placement for a child. So when a child is placed with a society on an extended access order, which is what we used to call crown wardship, the society is looking for a match for the child. And hopefully as soon as they start identifying potential matches for the child, they're talking to the adoptive parents about what access orders are connected to this child and who this child has connections to prior to the adoption placement. If as an adoptive parent or as a parent that's looking at being matched with a child, if you're not hearing from the Children's Aid Society if there's any access attached to your child, you should be asking the adoption worker. And I would be surprised if they're not telling you, but if they're not telling you, you should be asking that question. So when a match is found for a child and an adoptive parent, the society decides that they are going to place the child for adoption. They do need to give notice of an intention to place the child for adoption with all people who have a right of access to the child. And they do notify the Office of the Children's Lawyer as well. And the Office of the Children's Lawyer will appoint a counsel to your child. The OCL, the child's counsel, the child may know their counsel from previous involvement. It may be the same lawyer that represented them through the child protection proceedings, or it may be a new lawyer, it may be a stranger to them. It may be someone that's meeting with them for the first time in your home. That would be unusual, but it may be someone that the child does not know very well. As a parent, you need to be aware that your child, it might be a new person for them. And so you may want to talk to the OCL about your child's comfort with meeting with another adult. They may need to meet with the OCL may need to meet with the child and you before meeting with them alone, but the OCL will need to at some point meet with your child alone to talk about your child's wishes regarding contact with their biological family member. When the access holder, and this includes your child as well, is given 30 days to respond to the notice of intention. And how they respond is they respond by filing an application for openness. They serve it on all parties and they file it with the court. And for an openness application, the parties involved are the Children's Aid Society, the child, and any person who is an access holder. It's a bit surprising, but adoptive parents are not parties to the openness applications. Once any party files an application for openness, the adoptive parent is notified that the that someone has filed an openness application. This shouldn't come as a surprise to you. You should, with your work with your adoption worker, you should have an idea of whether you expect this to happen or not. So hopefully it's not a surprise to you and you've got a plan for what happens when the application comes. But in some rare cases, this might be a surprise, and in which case you'll just have to follow the process. The child is placed for adoption, whether or not there's an openness application that's brought, and the openness application is resolved while the child may be resolved while the child is in your care. The parties negotiate an openness order. So usually there's a first appearance in court, and usually it's adjourned for a month or a couple of months for everyone to just discuss what they think would be the best case scenario for openness for their child, for the child. Again, sometimes people already know that almost when the application's been first heard in court, because this discussion has already happened. But if it hasn't happened, you'll adjourn for a period of time. You'll probably have you might have mediation, and you might resolve the matter that way. Once you have an agreement, it's filed with the court, it's turned into a court order, and it is binding on all parties. If there's no agreement after mediation or after the first stage, then it will be litigated in court. And this is unusual. Most cases resolve at the stage after mediation. It's rare for there to be litigation on this issue. So the next slide, I will just, oh yeah, I've got to get going. So, court considerations. The court will consider 4 things when they're deciding what an appropriate openness order would be. And for whatever reason, it hasn't shown up on my slide. I don't know if it's the one in front of you guys, but in any event, the 4 considerations are whether it would be in the best interest of the child for there to be an openness order, whether it would be meaningful and beneficial to the child for there to be a continuation of the relationship between the child and the person seeking openness. If the child's over 12, the child has to consent to the openness order. And as well, the court needs to turn their mind to and consider whether the adoptive parent is able to follow the terms of the openness order. So this is where the adoptive parent has some power. They're not parties in the application, but an openness order cannot be made unless the court is convinced that the adoptive parent is able to maintain the openness order. So that is where you have the ability to have some control. Next slide. This slide was lovely. Oh, there you go. Well, I think that just says what I just said. So that's good. So then the next slide. Okay, so just some quick thoughts about openness orders. And again, you know, there are so many specifics in every case, so you cannot possibly go through each case. As Tara mentioned, you know, professionals do have menus and ideas of what would be good for openness in individual cases, but generally what I would agree with the other folks is that you want to be flexible in whatever openness arrangement you come up with. This is an arrangement that's going to live with your child from the day that they're placed for the day that order is made until they are an adult and they have the ability to maintain their relationship on their own with their biological family. You have to be aware that all of the you know, that their lives are going to change and their needs are going to change over time. The other thing I think it's helpful to be aware of is that this is an order that you're negotiating really on behalf of your child. You're trying to come up with an order that's going to maintain a relationship for your child to a biological family member. And so you want to be aware that your child's needs are going to change over time. And also, you know, if as they grow, it's going to be more them controlling the process than you controlling the process. So initially, if you've got like a 5 or 7 year old, you're going to be much more in control of what contact they have with their biological family. But as they get older and they become a teenager, they're going to have more control. And so you want to allow for that, that flexibility for that to take place. So I don't, some people really love having a specific number of visits a year that a child sees their biological parent. And, I like to have more an intention around what we want for the child. We want the child to feel like they can contact their parent. We want them to feel like their biological parent. We want them to feel like they can make a connection there if they want to. If there's a real pressure to have a minimum number of visits a year that the order would maintain, if you feel you could reasonably do between 2 and 4 visits a year, I would suggest that you make the number for the minimum, the smaller number, that you say it would be 2 visits a year. And nothing precludes you, obviously, from having more visits a year. You know, if your child comes to you and says, I'm really thinking about this person, I'm really wondering, what they're up to, there's nothing stops you from reaching out and doing more. It's just, it's hard to do less than what is in the order. You also want to limit, or you want to be careful not to make it too specific about how and where, and if it's in person or Skype. Certainly during COVID times, people are trying to do things over Skype. And so you just want to give yourself the flexibility and give your child the flexibility. You may want to talk about conditions that need to be present for the access. So for example, if your child is having a really rough time and they're seeing a therapist, and their therapist and you agree that, contact with their biological family right now might be triggering or difficult for them, you want to have something in place that says that if the child's treatment needs, or if there's something going on with your child that access wouldn't be good for them at the time, you want to have that in there. You also want to have the ability for the child to have some input into whether or not a visit takes place or not. They, when they're younger, it's one thing, especially, but as they get older, they're going to have their own thoughts, and you don't want to be stuck. You've got to follow an order, forcing your child to do something that your child is really not willing and able to do at that time. And that doesn't mean you don't encourage them to go to the visit, but it's just that they may be having a difficult time, and you need to be able to be aware of that in the wording. Also, if the parent has an issue with maybe an issue with alcohol or drugs, you want to be able to have some awareness that if they show up looking like there's something going on with the parent that may not be safe for your child, that you can terminate the visit or not have the visit take place. And another thing that happens sometimes where parents are really inconsistent in attending, you might want to have the ability that if there's a couple of missed visits that don't take place, that there be an ability of the adoptive, of the parent to, put the visits on hold until something can be arranged. There's so many considerations. Obviously, you need to be talking to your adoption worker about what the child's needs have been, what they are, and you need to be doing some soul searching with yourself and your family about what makes sense for your family and how you can support your child in maintaining an important relationship for them, but do it in a way that is not going to make things difficult in the future for you. So that's, I think I went over, but that's sort of a nutshell.
Amazing. We do have, and ladies, I have to tell you right off the top, we have so many families in attendance. This has definitely been the highest watched webinar that I have had the pleasure of hosting. So clearly that speaks so vividly with the importance of this topic. So thank you again so very much. And we have so many questions rolling in, and we only have like 15-ish minutes. So if we go a few minutes over, would that ruin anyone's evening? Be okay? Okay. So I just want to refer to the families that are actually watching us right now. So I'm going to grab those questions first. One community family is saying, how do we start having those conversations and honest communication with the birth family when we have never met them or spoken with them? We are the adoptive family.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know, Tara, if you know, I think what I would suggest is if you're still working, is it when the adoption hasn't happened yet, or if you're just doing the match, then I think you talk to your adoption worker and try to connect through them. That would be what my suggestion would be.
I think we're also shifting. Oh, sorry, Joyce, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead,
think,
Tara.
Okay, I think my thought around this is we're also shifting some of the historical mindset, and we're not fully there yet. You know, like I'm just thinking, like as recently as last year, I sat in a room full of people where somebody said, "Don't worry, this 8-year-old will forget their roots," and I was, you know, oh no, we need to make sure that's the kind of accuracy. So sometimes you may need to be your own advocate in reaching out to the adoption worker and saying, what would be needed for us to have a conversation? Would the adoptive family be willing? I've actually been in a position where, as a family therapist, I got to meet with the adoptive family and the biological family and talk about all the worries and fears and help manage some of that so that they could move forward and have a different kind of conversation. So I think what I'm actually thinking about is, how do you advocate for yourself, or how do you advocate to get information if a biological family isn't in a position that they can meet with you? But I'm also thinking that triad, I'm a big advocate for biological families deserve support to be able to get to that place as well, because they too are experiencing trauma and loss.
That's awesome.
Can I just respond to this from the adoptive parent point of view? So like my 2 oldest, who are now in their mid-30s, when we adopted them, there was none of this.
Right.
And even back then, and quite honestly, I don't even know why, because I didn't have the information that I do now. But back then, as a soon-to-be mom, I felt it was really important for the kids to be connected to their biological families. And one of the things that I did back then, with really out any direction, is I wrote a letter to the biological dad, in this case, who was trying at the time to fight for his daughter in court. And I just wrote a really heartfelt letter saying, you must be terrified. I know you love your daughter. I know things are hard for you. I will honor you. I will always let her know who you are. I will send you artwork. I will send you pictures. You have faced really tough times. And he got that letter 2 weeks before the final court date, and he withdrew. He told them at that time, I want my daughter to stay with this family. And I mean, I didn't write that letter for that purpose. I really, at the time, just wrote it thinking, if I was a parent and was facing losing my child, I would be devastated. And there was a story. So that's for my oldest daughter. And we just did simply exchange artwork. I would send them, you know, the little hands at Thanksgiving that are turkeys or whatever, personal, intimate stuff. And we kept in touch that way. The other thing is I did dig this up just to give you an idea. From 32 years ago, my oldest boy was with us, and because he was 11 and a half, almost 12, just started the conversation with him. You're living in our home. They were having us on probation because he was older. He had to kind of tell his children's lawyer, yes, he wanted to be adopted. So when the lawyer came, I don't know if you can see this, she asked if you were to be adopted. So this was my little guy at 12. I would be the happiest kid alive. Okay, but I want to turn it over, because here's where the real conversation started. Later, when she left, this is what he drew. And it says, give me your answer, young man.
Oh.
And he's down here screaming, no. that's where the conversation starts. He wanted so badly to be in a forever family, but he did not want to lose his biological family. So this is just real and raw. This is 32 years old, this little piece of paper. I will give it to him at some point. Anyway, that's to me the realness of it. From, you know, so you start where the child is at. You start with them always.
I think if I could,
that answered a few of the questions that we had come in, and how to start that conversation, and starting it where they are at. One of our community parents chimed in as well and said, I feel the social worker contact is important to support the adoptive parents. They were my savior in navigating the ongoing process of openness. So exactly
Totally.
what you had shared. Another family taps into this question and asks, what about initiating contact post-adoption when there's no adoption worker there to support at this point?
It can be done.
yeah, we reach out to the people that were involved, or the people that would have some knowledge about how to do it, because it can be done.
I think there's wisdom even in your question. So when you think about what you want for your children, your youth, or even your young adult, if they're heading into age 18, 19, you know, you talk with them. What is it? What questions do they want answered? Why are they curious? Do they want a full-on relationship, or do they just want to meet once to find out medical information? Do they say they don't even know what they want? They just want to see who they look like. Try to get from them what they're hoping for, and that's your starting point. And just being honest, and even expressing your own fears. I mean, maybe there's a hesitation there because you're thinking, oh, they're gonna, at 16, again, my oldest boy at 16 went and met his bio mom face to face and came home and said, I'm moving out. And I said, I'm gonna miss you. The door is always open here. Go and do what you need to do. And he did. And he went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for years. He has a relationship with all of us. And that was, you know, so we did pictures and stuff way back then. But at 16, he needed to meet his bio mom face to face. His bio mom was at his wedding in September. You know, we were both there. So it comes at different ages and stages and for different reasons. So you need to find out from your child or your youth, what's your need right now? Start with that.
I think one of the things it brings up for me too is because of the menu of openness options, we're not asking a child to give up and have more loss because of our adult worries and fears. We're really trying to manage our own worries and fears as adults so that our kids' needs are actually met. And I think that's a beautiful example of take a pause, get some support about what kinds of things can I ask, what am I attempting to explore, and then come back to that menu of options.
I know for myself, I personally, and I believe I shared it when we talked openness before, was that we didn't have an openness order or agreement or anything like that when our young lad came home. And I was absolutely holding on to my own fears as we pummeled forward. And he's 13 and a half now. So it was about a year ago that the questions were all fast and furious. And I was so scared of, what does this mean? What are we opening up? What are we welcoming to our family? And I actually used our Adopt4Life openness support group to be like, help me. Like, how do I do this? Because I knew that I was exactly what you're saying. I was holding back for my own reasons. It was nothing to do with him. And we were able to go through and support him in meeting his biological father and a half sister and create that, you know, moment in time and those memories for him when it was the adults that I put as my support circle that helped me, which allowed me to help him. So I'll move on to another question is, once an order is agreed upon, and forgive me, Martha, if you answered this, once an order is agreed upon and a court order is approved, can a bio parent come back post-adoption and request changes?
So after the order is approved, so there's two things. If if there's an openness order that the bio parent wants to change.
I think so, yeah, because they're saying, can the bio family request changes post adoption?
No, it's just once the order's made, the only way that an order can be changed is if it goes back to court. And I have to tell you that happens so rarely. And I think it's only the adoptive parents that can change it. I don't think the bio parents actually have the ability to change it under the legislation. I apologize for not knowing that. I can check that and actually check, Shannon. Other thing to know too is that
families, so I can.
Sorry?
I've made notes of the families asking questions, so we can circle back to them after.
The other thing too is that if the biological parents do not bring an application for openness within those 30 days, the answer is a hard no. They can't do anything past that. And in court cases, often those days are often extended and times are often extended. One date that's very, very firm is that 30-day period of time. And it's almost impossible. In fact, I'm not even sure if it's ever been done where that 30 days has been extended for a biological parent who hasn't filed their application. So if you know that those 30 days have gone by and no one's filed an application, there's next to no chance that they will be able to do it in the future.
Can I say something? Sorry, can I just say something to this? Because I think it's what Joyce has talked about too. I always love the legal, and then I go to the heart. I always think about things from the heart, and Joyce said it. The fear of loss, the fear of more loss will have people dig their heels in and claw. And so when I hear a question like that, I'm thinking, what's happening for that person? Like, that's a legit fear, which tells us we got to talk about what your limits, what your boundaries, what your fears are, and try to access some information about how you can understand that, work through that, but also understand if the fear of that is legit, then that says to me, it would be really beneficial for somebody to be supporting from the heart that biological person who may be doing this. So again, always coming back to the heart, because a legal piece of paper doesn't remedy the heart.
Yeah, and also the child, right? Like, what is your child needing? What is your child looking for? And that's what I would say.
I'm going to skip ahead to, because we are an adoption, kinship, and customary care organization. So this question comes from a kin family that says, I feel like this can be very difficult and different for kin families, especially when the child has been apprehended. What advice would you give when the relationship with the bio parents and the kin family is very negative?
Mm-hmm.
You have to go back. I know it sounds hokey, but you have to go back again to what Tara and I have been saying, is to the heart of the matter, the true heart, because, I think and I'm involved in a tough kin situation right now. My youngest bio mom has severe addiction, and we've had pretty open access. We've had a pretty great relationship. But I have had to take a stand and say, you can't come and see the youngest because you're in such bad shape, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and with COVID, bio mom's out on the street, so I have to protect the family. And those are very, very hard things to say. But I say things that are firm and clear, but in a respectful and loving way. So I say to bio mom, I know you love your daughter. I know you miss her. But right now, because you're not well, you would be risking her physical safety. I know you don't want to do that. So I'm going to say, no, you can't come. When you're okay again, when you're safe again, when you can talk coherently. Right now, she can't even talk coherently. And I say, our door will be open when you're well and when you're able and when you're going to be in such a good way that you can be positive for your little girl who you love so much. We are here waiting for you. And then when I talk to my little girl and tell her I've had to set those boundaries, like we cry together. We were crying this afternoon because we were able to have one phone call. It's the first phone call in a year. But bio mom was straight, and she called and she said to me, I'm Aunt. You told me, Auntie Joyce, if I could have a straight conversation, you'd let me talk. I said, absolutely. Let's get her on the phone. That was really tough. It's been a long, long time. And as soon as we hung up, my little one, who's 10, burst into tears and said, I miss her. And that, this just happened, so I'm a little emotional. We held each other, and it was hard, and it makes me mad that her mom is continuing to use. I feel protective, but it's got to be about her, and she needs to be able to have contact. And as hard as it is, it pays off in the end, because like Tara said, you go through those really hard conversations, and what that does is it grows your bond, it grows the trust, it grows the love, and it grows the safety, and then your kids are okay in the end. So on some levels, we as the grown-ups, as hard as that is, we have to buck up and step up to the plate. It's not easy, but it's worth it.
I also think about, when I'm thinking about all kind of where there's been an adversarial journey to adoption, and I think about the challenge that must be in terms of especially kin placements, that through court and through the negative things that have been said and the evidence that comes out and the us and them, and then it ends, and I wonder, after all of that has been aired and all of that has been put into the playing field of a courtroom, how do people heal and repair from that? And so again, I come back to that healing and repairing and getting people the support they need. And I don't necessarily mean professional support, but accessing just places to be able to talk honestly and problem solve with somebody who can be neutral and help consider, alternative ways of thinking, because when we're emotional, our problem solving brain is hijacked. And so let's get some external brains and some external ideas to help us stay focused on, how do we be kind and compassionate and put our kids' needs first.
And setting those boundaries right at the very beginning, if you can, especially in kin, you kind of have an inside scoop of, what the family is all about or what the issues might be. And in this particular case, because I knew the biggest boundary biggest challenge would be the addiction, the boundary that I set right at the very, very beginning is that when you are using, you can't be with the child. It's too traumatic. And saying that with the support of, at the time, CAS and the planning committee and all that, and saying that order, because it is an order in our case, that order is in place to protect your child. So what the common ground always is, whether you're kin or non-kin or whatever, the common ground is we all love the child. Whether or not the biological parent is struggling with parenting issues that makes it not safe for him or her to continue to parent, that doesn't mean they don't love the child. It means they have some issues that aren't able to be resolved in a timely enough manner. So always go back to that common ground. You love the child, I love the child. How can somehow through this mess, can we work together to move forward for what's best for the child? It works pretty much 99% of the time, unless you're dealing with someone who's really ill on many levels. You know, there's always something that falls outside of either end of the curve. So in the majority of the cases, if you come to that common ground, you'll be able to move forward.
You're getting so much love, ladies, and the family for that question was directed from simply says, thank you very much. I'm going to move on. If you have a couple more minutes, I want to just grab a couple more questions. This question came in via text and says, what if your children are saying that they don't want contact, don't want to see or meet their biological families, but all the research and adult adoptee voices say that it's the healthiest for them to have those relationships?
You want, Joyce? There is something about autonomy. There's not a brushstroke that says, this is how you do it. And there are people who are going to want to keep something separate and not need to know. And we can respect that. But I would say, if you've created the foundation where kids can openly express what they think they need or what they want, and that can ebb and flow throughout time, then sitting in this moment of, I don't need this right now, that's okay. That's that, you know, but they can know that if that changes, or if they need something different, or even if they're curious, you would want to know.
Mm-hmm. So again, I give, you know, I think we also have to look at age and stage, like the chronological age / always developmental age, because you can have a 16-year-old who's functioning at a much younger level who would have trouble making that decision, and you could have someone who's much younger, who's quite mature, who's able to make that decision. So again, you know, just using my youngest, because we're going through this right now, she at one point said to me, Mommy, I don't want to see my bio mommy, not the way she is, not the way it's happening right now. So I, you know, again, I just went to bio mom and I said, look, if she's only 10, she was 9 when she told me that. And she said, I can't see it. It's too scary for me. And I just was really honest with bio mom. And again, starting on that basis of, you know, I know you want what's best for your biological child. And so we have a little girl who's really struggling, who's saying it's scary for her to see you the way you are. What can we do about that? I don't want to put her in the car and take her against her will. And you don't want to have a visit against her will, because it's painful for her and you, because she doesn't want to be there. So again, in this case, it was hard, but we worked it out, and bio mom was able to have a call and tell my youngest, when you're ready, when you want to come back and see me face to face, tell Joyce. And it's been 1 year and 2 months that my daughter has not seen her bio mom face to face, because she's really ill, and it really upsets my daughter. About a week or 2 ago, she said to me, I think I'm getting ready because I'm missing her so much. I'll see her no matter how it is. So I, you know, had reached out to bio mom, and then we started with the phone call. We're going to go slow because it's been a long time and we don't really know what's happening. But she needs to be in control of that choice, and knowing both of us are respecting her. So I'm respecting her by going to her bio mom and saying she needs time. And her bio mom's respecting her by saying, I'm not pushing it. Let's just talk on the phone. We have to give them some control over their own life so that they know that they're respected, and that they have a right to say, this is what I need, and that need is going to be met.
And I think, Joyce, what you're bringing up is this idea of We don't get to shield kids from hard things, but we get to support them through it. And the sooner we start building those resources, the more adept and they'll be able to navigate some of the hard things in their world.
It's hard to hear a little kid say, like on the phone call today, it was a very short call, but it was very interesting because at the end, my 10-year-old said to her bio mom, I can't wait to see you, but I'm only going to see you when you're straight. She said it. I'm like, wow. Her bio mom heard that, you know.
You know, Shannon.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I can't talk right now.
I
There.
I just wanted to say, I don't know where everybody went, I assume. When we're having really difficult conversations, there's a back pocket tool I like to give parents, and that is simply, if a child is asking a really difficult question or bringing something hard to talk about up, it's okay to say, you know, I'm really glad you're talking to me about this, or this is a really good question. Can I get back to you? Which allows you as a parent to regroup, get some information, regulate what's going on for you, and come back to it. So you don't have to have all of the answers and all of the solutions right in the moment that a child brings you something.
No.
I love that. I think it's about giving, and I've learned that along my adoption journey, is we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace, that we don't always have to have all the answers and fix all the things, and give our children the knowledge that, we want them to think we're superheroes, but they have to know that we can't always fix everything as well. So taking that time to step back and try to get them the answer if we can, and being open and honest if we can't.
Superheroes have support too, you know.
Absolutely. I think we'll clue up with one more question as we've gone over, and believe it or not, we still have the whole community watching us. They're loving on all of this. But I thought we'd end with, can you talk a bit about what rights the child might have when an openness order is made? I've gotten that question asked a few times.
Well, I'll just speak a little bit from the legal perspective. They will have a lawyer. Their lawyer will be there, like in terms of making the order, they'll have input into what the order would look like, and so they do have a lot of rights in the process of creating the order. Hopefully, in the order there will be wording that will allow them to have a lot of autonomy and authority throughout the period of the openness order, that will allow them to have some decision-making power as time goes on. I don't know if Joyce or Tara, you know, from a different perspective, but.
Well, I just think our kids should have all the rights in the world, along with the responsibility that goes with it. Eventually, as they learn that, we have to teach them, both. And again, I think if we just need to listen to our kids. They know a lot about who they are as people. They have been through stuff that a lot of us can't even imagine, and they're resilient, and they've survived, and they've come to us. They're starting a new beginning. So, like, just in terms of rights, I think, again, you know, how we would approach a biological family in the plan. I wouldn't say to a bio family, well, your child has rights and this is what he or she wants. I would be saying, you know, we have to figure out what's going to work for, you know, our child, and what's going to help them get on a healthy track. And it's not easy. Like, and it's a hard conversation. But again, I think if we find the common ground, always look for the common ground, whatever that may be. I mean, it's in the bigger piece of the puzzle. It's the bubble of love, for sure. They love their kids. We love our kid. We're excited about our new child or youth coming into our home. But what's the common ground? Like Martha said earlier, you know, if they're saying, I need to see my child twice a year, then go for it. Twice we can do that, you know, like find some place to start where you're giving. When you give, here's the perfect ending. When you give, you will receive. That's all I can say. There's a reality to that.
Research
When we
says
hold
that.
back, yeah, when we hold back, when we live in fear, then that's the base of our life. When you open up and you give and you love, there's risk. You're going to be hurt, but the payoff, it's priceless, right?
And I do think that that is the perfect place to end, ladies. We have, and I'm sure you'll log off and you'll look, so many comments. The emojis are hearts and love and smiley faces, and just thank you 100 times over from our community, and from myself, and I know our entire team. Thank you for giving your time for us. With us, and I do think we got to all of the questions in some way, whether it was through the slides or mutually through the other answers. But if anybody feels like we didn't, feel free to email me at Shannon@Adopt4Life. I know how to find these wonderful ladies, and we will get those questions answered for you. Believe it or not, which is an awesome benefit of these webinars, the Adopt4Life Strengthening Openness Open Adoption Support Group, which you can become a member of if you're a community parent, has welcomed 11 new people just in the time of this webinar, which means our community families responded, and are definitely looking to expand their knowledge and support their children, which is exactly the point of what we do here tonight. So thank you so much, ladies. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening. If you're like me, that means you're going to go to bed. Have a wonderful Thursday, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye, ladies.
Bye,
Kind to
guys.
yourselves.
Bye.
Bye-bye.